I'll start with, Ayesha, why don't you come on up and into the hot seat, and I'll sort of explain what we're going to do in context here. So I'm gonna let you introduce yourself and your organization in a second. But we have four, I think, unique but at the same time very related perspectives here. The intention of the conversation over the next 30, 45 minutes is to look at these big four questions. So how do you respond to disasters in real time? How do you build up the real sort of long-term engagement, the long-term of understanding that's needed? How do you educate people and engage them in a thoughtful and deep way to solve complex problems? And obviously, what is the role of media and technology and all of these new and emerging platforms and channels and tools that we have in not just facilitating that, but potentially creating totally new ways of thinking about that. So over the course of the four conversations, we're going to look at accomplishing big things, complex things, not forgetting some of the small things, because I think that often gets mistaken. We're going to look at the role of media on its own, but also within organizations externally. And we're also going to look at things like celebrity and some of the kind of, I don't know, easy or interesting kind of flashy ways that people do things. So before I start asking you questions, why don't you just sort of introduce yourself and explain what the Hybrid Institute that you run does, and then we'll launch right into the conversation.
Okay, great. First of all, thank you so much for having me here, Scott, Louis, and Brian. Great to be here with you. So the Hybrid Reality Institute is a think-do tank that I founded last year, and it's based here in New York. I've been working in technology and innovation strategy for over 10 years. And what I realized was that we were moving from what we commonly know as the information age, where we can very easily exchange large amounts of data, to what I think is appropriately deemed the hybrid age. And so we're now entering an age where we're not just using gadgets, but we will experience life amongst technology, where technology will proliferate with sensors all around us, when machines will become much more intelligent. And technology will go back to its original meaning, which was before the web, which is technology with a capital T, which includes all the sciences and biotechnology, nanotechnology, and robotics. And what will happen is that this age will be full of a lot of disruptions. Some of these disruptions we've already seen. For instance, the music industry has suffered a lot. In 10 years, its revenues halved. We'll see something very similar in the publishing industry. Just 3 years after the Kindle came out, Borders declared bankruptcy. We'll see something similar in the manufacturing industry. So we'll see a lot of these disruptions, and there is no guide for people how to deal with these technologies that we tend to adopt very fast. What the social implications, emotional, psychological implications of these technologies are. So what the Hybrid Reality Institute does is study these different facets of the hybrid age.
So certainly, I think it's apparent that society is very different and changing very rapidly because of the influence of the internet and technology in all its forms. And because we're now connected, the severity and the impact that humanitarian crises, whether they are an earthquake or a spread of disease or whatever it is much more widely felt or much more appreciated from a global standpoint. But it doesn't seem to me that the response to humanitarian crisis has significantly evolved or changed in the context of this sort of hybrid reality. We are still, I think, looking at technology as largely as a basic communications delivery tool. We've seen some instances where technology, has directly resulted in the saving of lives. What do you see as the hybrid reality response to a humanitarian crisis? What is it we're not doing that we should be starting with because we have these tools now widely available?
Well, I look at the near future. So some of the things that I'm going to talk about are not completely prevalent now, but will be within the next couple of years. So it's good for the crisis community to start thinking about them. One of these things is the Internet of Things. So right now we're very dependent on people responding to things, and there's a kind of slacktivism where you can just express your grief on Twitter. But as you rightly pointed out in your 4 questions, that doesn't really translate into response. So I think it will translate into response when we are able to gather vast amounts of information, overlay information on each other, and then provide guidance for people exactly how they should respond. So if I'm originally from Pakistan, an earthquake occurs in Pakistan, I'm devastated, what can I do? So I can just go on Facebook and call my friends, and I'm constantly whining about it and upset about it. But if there was some way to identify that I'm in New York versus being in Lahore versus being very close to the earthquake site, which through my phone, the crisis NGO should be able to do, then we would be able to guide me on exactly what I should be doing, whether I should be selling clothes, sending clothes, or giving money. And I think what we need is to use technology in a much more integrated fashion to give people very particular things that they can do.
Well, but I think part of the problem in that discussion is that people look at the technology as the solution. And it's very easy to say, and I think everyone knows technology is not the answer to the question. But that does not seem to have stopped us from putting technology into the role of providing the answer to the question, which we don't necessarily know how to ask, right? The public doesn't know the range of options that it needs to provide in response to a humanitarian crisis. So they go on to the platforms that they've been trained or experienced to go onto, and whatever answer pops up first seems perfectly reasonable, so they go for it. So part of it is certainly a different use of technology, but also part of it is almost a cultural change in the way that technology is seen. What is going to be required for us to do both of those things, to not only use the technology different, but to look at the technology differently in the context of what we as individuals or we as communities are supposed to be doing?
Well, this used to be a big problem. All the years that I was consulting on Wall Street, cultural change was very important. But what I find very interesting in the last couple of years is that when technology works well, we adopt it very quickly now. So, for instance, if these apps were integrated into Twitter and into Facebook, and what you saw was that every time you had a hashtag, that you were given a personal message that told you what to do exactly, I think people would very quickly respond to it. I don't think this is the age where there's a big lag and there needs to be a cultural shift. I think culturally we are very used to being in a deluge of data, and the filtering is the problem over here. But I do think adaptation is actually, adoption is very fast.
So if filtering is the need, who ultimately needs to filter? One of the big criticisms that's coming out now is that Google, for example, has sort of a filter bubble, that the technology is so smart, it picks up your behaviors, it starts to recognize the things that you traditionally go looking for, and it provides them more readily. Makes total sense, except that in all likelihood you've never experienced a humanitarian crisis on the scale that we're seeing more and more, hopefully I should say. And so if you're stuck in your filter bubble, the technology's not going to provide the proper filter to get you the proper information. So what is is it another technology, or is it a human component? What is the filtering need that isn't being met?
I think this is where NGOs, the United Nations, they will still continue to be very important actors. But I think the technology that they use is not very sophisticated. So really what we need are mashups, right? We need the video that somebody takes with the geospatial mapping, with the sensors that are probably going to be increasingly in people's phones. Information is coming from there. Then sensors that are put in bridges or otherwise that can predict that maybe some humanitarian crisis is going to happen. So all this information is coming. And what needs to be done is that very good software engineers need to be hired or be part of the philanthropic projects of a lot of companies like Google. And so Google, for instance, has committed to giving 1% of its annual revenue to charity. And yeah, that's good, but honestly, I would take 1% of its engineers' time. I think that would go a very, very long way in intelligently filtering, organizing this information. And remember, people think it's internet penetration. Internet penetration is not a problem. Everybody has mobile phones, 70%, 80% mobile penetration in a number of these countries. And so all the work, all the digital crunching is being done in the cloud, and then it just comes back to your mobile phone.
So two questions, and I'll let you off the hot seat. One is, it seems to me that people who are really nerdy and spend a lot of time either thinking about humanitarian crisis or about technological development and all of the interesting social ways that it can be used, are having this conversation. And that's maybe 10,000 people in the entire world. And then there are billions of people who, up until the point that a major humanitarian crisis emerges, could care less, and then are either overwhelmed by the data or so inexperienced with the types of actions that we need them to take that the response becomes muddled. Is there a way with the engineers or with the behavior shifting that technology can influence to prepare people in a constructive way so that if and when a humanitarian crisis evolves, it's not a matter of then training and directing and pointing, but really just turning on the population because they already know what to do. Very much the same way when I was in elementary school, they taught us to stop, drop, and roll. And I imagine if I'm ever caught in a fire, stop, drop, and roll would just come naturally to me. Is it possible to preordain in this hybrid reality age a set of behaviors that people will take when it comes up?
Yes. I think, again, what we're seeing now is that technology has what is called persuasive capabilities. And so at Stanford University, Professor B.J. Fogg has pioneered this amazing study called persuasive technology. And he studied Facebook a lot, and Zynga, which is this amazing company which produces games. And people really become addicted to these games. That's not to say that's how we should influence behavior, but there are some basic behavioral psychology that you can study and use technology like a mobile phone. For instance, if you have an avatar on your mobile phone and it looks kind of like you and it tells you to go to the gym, research has shown you will go to the gym more often than if Oprah Winfrey is telling you or somebody else is telling you. So it's very powerful to have technology, and that's why I mean it's the hybrid age, because technology is just not a dumb piece of equipment in your pocket or a smartphone. You respond emotionally to technology. And Sherry Turkle from MIT has done amazing work on this. So you need to take advantage of the fact that we respond emotionally to technology, and these crisis organizations need to begin to think of how we can interweave these kind of persuasive technologies in everyday applications like Facebook and like Twitter or Google or anywhere else. And I think we'd find that the CEOs of these companies are quite nerdy, and they're also very results-based. And I was reading, so if you don't know, but Google had an organization called google.org. And one of the reasons it kind of lost affection from the founders was because it was very loosey-goosey, and it wasn't really metrics-based. And that sounds very weird in a humanitarian crisis. I worked a lot in villages and jails in Pakistan, so I know one thinks the human life is what matters, but at the end of the day, you can now measure success and you can now measure influence, and I think that is a compelling argument to make to these people.
So very quickly, I think there's any number of things that we can do, but there are probably some things we need to stop doing, the things that are standing in the way of actually achieving some kind of different approach or breaking through some barrier. If you had to take one thing that you wanted us to stop doing in the context of responding to humanitarian crisis, what would be that thing that we need to stop doing in order to make other things possible?
This is kind of not a particular criticism of it, but I do think that now we should stop thinking about it, that the recent social media hype has been very useful. But on the other hand, it's made us think that crowdsourcing is the way to achieve a lot of things. And it's very important, but now we can add another layer on top of it, which is to add sensors and other technologies and really in partnership. So people don't need to do so many things. That's a lot of pressure if you're on the ground, that you have to send something and make it make sense, and there's a lot of information overload. I think what we need is in the cloud, we need to focus on building our capabilities in the cloud, and that will eventually feed back into humanitarian efforts.
All right, you are off.